firstly, there's a really sort of a need to sort of be cognizant of the potential for capture. You know, sort of we don't want to be sort of utilizing ideas, knowledges from the South, from Indigenous peoples, and exploiting them just because they happen to be really great and they're going to meet all of our climate targets. So I think that's something really to bear in mind, that there needs to be a sort of an equality of an exchange. Nature-based solutions, I think, you know, it's also, it's a really great concept, but it also sort of within it can have both useful and problematic components. So I think that coming back to this idea of how we can think through the implications of certain interventions. So when we think about a nature-based solution, when we're using sort of maintaining a wetland rather than having to put in a water sort of processing plant, for example, you know, is one really good example, which is kind of standard within the ecosystem services literature, where you can actually say, well, if you just maintain this, you're going to save this amount of money of the sort of putting in the plant, but still get this quality of water out, plus all of these other aesthetic benefits. So, you know, so there's a really easy argument to be made for a lot of these kinds of nature-based solutions. For example, similarly within urban areas, you know, greening of urban areas, sort of putting in pollinator corridors, making sure that there's actually food a lot more sort of grown and accessible within these areas, you know, has all of these really obvious benefits. And so I think that it's more about sort of talking to the really fundamental restructuring of how we actually look at our material consumption, and that we can't actually be perpetually extractive around nature, that it needs to sort of come back to what Jason was saying about this this relationality that of exchange rather than extractive use from nature. And I think that, you know, if we have nature-based solutions that aren't sort of based on, sort of premised on this idea of extraction, then that's sort of a really important sort of point to make. I did just want to talk to sort of Jason mentioned the idea of scenarios, and that, yeah, I mean, he's totally right. The IPCC scenarios that we have, the RCPs and the shared socioeconomic pathways are extremely limited in the kind of range of these futures that we have. And this is actually why within the IPBES Scenarios and Models group, we've been really trying to develop something that's a lot more fundamentally sort of different, that takes these pluralities that you can actually put in a variety of different solutions into the space and see how they play out. So we can use mind experiments, sort of thought experiments, not mind experiments, thought experiments, to be able to see what potential in 2100, what could the implications of this be? And we've actually sort of done this exercise with some geoengineering ideas of like, how could this actually go really, really, really wrong? And I think we also need to be telling those stories, as well as like, we can capture X amount of carbon within this if we do it incorrectly. You know, the kinds of stories that we're going to be telling ourselves are really really crazy. And I just wanted to say, there was a point in the chat there on the types of archetypes and sort of stories and science fiction books that are out there that help us do this. There's increasingly a lot of work, whether it's sort of Kim Stanley Robinson's sort of latest, which I think everyone, the Ministry for the Future, which I think everyone within the sustainability sphere started to read. But I mean, Ursula Le Guin unpacks this. There's a recent book by Pip Bennett called Game Changer, which actually talks about a post-setback or post-apocalyptic world, but we are actually giving everyone jobs and we're able to sort of do a restoration. And this only happened after the setback, after we sort of went into a complete decline. And sort of the idea is that, can we learn from those kinds of post-apocalyptic stories of how humans reconfigured their relationships to change our decisions now, so we don't actually have to go into that complete collapse and reconfiguration? I think that's the really big challenge that we're facing right now, is are we going to sort of find ourselves in the collapse before we actually reconfigure things, or can we do enough deep thinking to actually change our behavior in the present?